These little men in brown robes kept showing up in my home. I was living in Mount Clemens, Michigan at the time, and they wanted to show me some pictures. And I wasn't really open to that. I was terribly frightened about what was happening to my consciousness. And long story short, was they came back, they visited regularly for the next year and a half, and they showed me pictures of the future and what was coming over 1980 and 81. And those pictures were life changing.
Today we're talking with the fabulous Penny Kelly. Welcome in, Penny. How are you doing today?
I'm well. I'm very well. And it's good to be here. Hello to everyone out there. I hope you're
Yeah.
staying warm.
And I just want to say, I was thinking on how to introduce Penny before we hopped on, and it's so big and so complicated that I'm going to let her just tell the story about how she came to be doing the work that she's doing.
Okay, so I think where it begins is back in 1979, there was a full-blown spontaneous awakening of Kundalini, which is the awakening of consciousness. And what that does is shift you into the God state. And then from that point forward, all kinds of things happened because when you come back from that, you are forever changed. And you know a lot of things that you don't want to know, that you are really struggling with. And it took me a while. And in the process of that struggle, these little men in brown robes kept showing up in my home. I was living in Mount Clemens, Michigan at the time, and they wanted to show me some pictures. And I wasn't really open to that. I was terribly frightened about what was happening to my consciousness. And long story short, was they came back, they visited regularly for the next year and a half, and they showed me pictures of the future and what was coming over 1980 and 81. And those pictures were life changing. That's all I can say is that they were very to the point. They were disturbing. They were enlightening. They were encouraging. They were so many. There was so much in those pictures. And they weren't just pictures. Sometimes it was as if I was in the middle of what was happening. And what they were showing me was what's going to happen. That was 1980. What's going to happen between the, you know, 2000, the year 2000 and 2025. And so they came back 11 years later after I saw those pictures, and they asked me to write down what I saw. And I did not want to do that. It took me a long time to write it down and to get the kind of really cheerful business like approach to some really hard things to get your mind around. And when I finally published that, I didn't really have any way of letting people know that I had written it, and it just took off. And so Robes, A Book of Coming Changes, has been out there for a long time. And just the other day, Kimberly, somebody asked me one time how much of what has happened or what they predicted has happened. And I made a list of what they had showed me, and almost, I'm going to say 90% of it has come to pass. And we're just not to, I think, the remaining 10%. And what is really happening is that there's a change of paradigms. They said, and this I think is the bottom line, you have grown past the structures, the institutions, and the thinking that once stabilized you. You've grown past that. It's like old clothes that you can't make fit anymore, no matter what you do. And you have to make some changes. And so they were all about here's what's coming. And here's if you can keep your eye on what you would like to create, here's what you can create and likely will create given the status of your consciousness at the time you're creating, because consciousness creates. It's all consciousness. So the things that I saw were kind of hard to get your mind around. I was not really very willing in the beginning to contemplate seriously what they were showing me, because one of the very first things was that the US broke up as a country, as a nation. There was war. We split up into three or four, and then five, and then six, and then ongoing pieces, regions. They were kind of like bioregions, and all of the governance was different. The belief systems were different. There were people from other planets and other places, other dimensions on this planet that we were freely contemplating. There was a whole new way of feeding ourselves, educating ourselves, doing business, building houses. Everything was different. And what I see now, after what, 44 years, is that all of that is happening. And we are coming apart. And it's people are not seeing the bigger picture. And so it's really, I think, really important to get your mind around that bigger picture, to look at what's happening. It's not just a whole bunch of little isolated issues or even big isolated issues. It's a global turnover that is going to change everything about life. And we're going to have what the robes called a whole new world, a new earth. And we have to be willing to make that journey. And we have to be willing to recreate, rethink everything. So
You
here we
know,
are.
Penny, you said something that I was so happy to hear you articulate so clearly. These are not individual little problems around the planet.
Oh,
This is a whole coordinated effort on the planet, and there's a literal conflict between one thinking how this planet should be run and another. One thing I want to back up to about the robes is, who do you think they were, and why was Earth so important to them? Why was it important enough to come to you to really give you this information and have you go forward and spread this information?
I never asked who they were because I just kept wishing they would go away. But over the years since then, what I have realized is the number of people, beings, forms of consciousness that are out there that are, they keep their eye on, they work as kind of a lot of people know what spirit guides are. These, the little men in brown robes, there were 7 of them. And they were short, they were dressed like little monks, they glowed. They looked like they had been scrubbed and shined, spit shined kind of thing. They actually gave off light. And I think that they were a group of people that keep their eye. Every planet has groups of people that just kind of try to work as helpers. We on the planet in this civilization have kind of degenerated. Our caring and our connections and our willingness to be helpful and thoughtful and generous and kind and cooperative, that's kind of faded over this last, I'm going to say, 25 years. That has not faded with other groups of people. There are groups that are far more advanced, far more evolved beings from other places that are here, because what they see, and this I've been told this again and again, is that we are going to make a jump in consciousness. We're going to shift, we're going to evolve, whatever term you want to call it. And they want to see that happen, because when you are at a lower level and you're in the kind of conditions that we are in, there's a huge aura of suffering, of pain, of fear, of controversy, of ugliness, of just hurting one another, that goes out into the universe. And they do not like that. They do not want that. And so there's what they do is track the what I'll call the evolutionary steps that a given population is making. And when they get to the crux of the matter, they know how difficult that is. They know what it's like to have to let go of everything that you've believed in, everything that held you up, everything that you leaned on. They know that that's very difficult, and the whole thing can disintegrate, or it can take a step into a higher form of consciousness. And we loosely refer to that as 4D, four dimensional consciousness, which has a different set of ethics and values and behaviors. And they want to see us make that step or make that shift. And so they're here supporting, and that's what the robes do. They also, the little men in brown robes, are specifically assigned to work with individuals who have had a full awakening of consciousness. And I know from my communications with them that what they look for is light. And when there is a big increase in the amount of energy and the amount of consciousness flowing through someone, there's a big increase in the amount of light that they give off. And they watch for that, and then they go and try to help those people make it through that shift to a new way of seeing the world. And over the last 40 years, I have worked with a lot of people who have also suffered their way through a full Kundalini awakening, and you do need help. You do need support. You absolutely need something to say, no, don't panic. You're at this stage. Trust that intelligence. It is an intelligent process. And yes, you're going to feel like an outsider. And yes, you're going to feel like nothing makes any sense. But that's keep going, keep going. You're coming to a place where the full human potential is going to take another step. So that's a long answer to who are the robes, where they come from, that kind of thing. Just know that there are other beings out there that are there to help, and they
Yeah.
watch over us very carefully, very, very carefully.
Can you share, Penny, just a little bit about what you know to be your role here on the planet?
Well, yeah. Okay. So I came here as part of a team to help with this transition to a more expansive consciousness. And so my particular task is to, and continues to be, teaching the world about the mind and consciousness, how it works. And I have some science background, I have some medical background, I have a whole bunch of spiritual background now, compliments of the awakening process. That really, in a nutshell, is the work. I teach. I I used to work with one-on-one, but after the whole problem with the shot in the arm started 4 years ago, 5 years ago, it was like, no, no, it's time to branch out and work with more people. And so now I have Patreon and I have YouTube and BitChute and Rumble and Buzzsprout and all these different kinds of channels where people who are ready to hear can hear the information about consciousness. And it's really, from my point of view, it's really exciting. It's really interesting. And it brings hope, it brings wisdom, it brings grace, it brings power back to the individual. And that power has been sort of sneaked away over the last 1,000 or 2 years. And we have to go back to that, what the robes call the inner authority. You
Yeah,
have to go back to making decisions for yourself, not just being a good girl or good boy.
because you've been told to.
Yeah, right.
Let's talk a little bit about, and I mentioned before we got on that it's confusing out here if you don't have the understanding that you have or have had the experiences that you've had. If you've just been raised in a, little neighborhood and you went to college and got married and got a job and you voted for who you thought was going to do the best job of running the country and you played golf on the weekend and you belong to the PTA. If you don't have the background that you have, and you look around, you might think that the world is just the problem is politics or the problem is corporate greed. There might be a disconnect between what is really going on the planet. And I think that that is a leap that's hard for people because thinking that something greater is going on has been so stigmatized.
Yeah.
And we've been discouraged from stepping into our power, identifying a bigger issue. Can you talk a little bit about making that jump from, gee, this, it's not just politics, and I think something bigger is going on, but if I go down this road, everything I thought to be true might not be, and then what do I do with myself?
Oh, wow. That's a big rabbit hole. So I think there are some things I know that absolutely refuse to say because they're so awful. They're so discouraging. What I will say is that there's a lot of people that I hope will be able to hear a bigger message. There is a takeover effort going on this planet. That takeover effort is by hidden people. They've been here a long time. They are hoping to eliminate all the people who don't think for themselves, all the people who aren't healthy, all the people who aren't marginally self sufficient and self sustaining, and et cetera, et cetera. And they do want to reduce the population to a mere percentage of what we have now. And I do know what they are planning beyond that, but it's too science fictiony for people to get their mind around. And so what I'll say is that there's a need to understand that the government is not really our government. It's being controlled by others. And so the question is not political. It doesn't matter which party because they're both being controlled. And the religious system is not really a religion. There's all kinds of trouble breaking out now around the Bible. And the truth about the Bible is, I mean, the Bible, I think, is a fabulous book of the history of the Hebrews. Well, who else has tracked their history like that? Not very many people. Now, I can't think of hardly anybody, maybe a few people in the Far East, but we've come to this place where if you haven't looked further than just the political or just the financial or just the medical issues going on, or if you haven't run into the gender issues in your own family, and you haven't seen or known what's been going on in the education system to facilitate that, and you haven't really probably have all heard the trust the science kind of thing. If you haven't been in the science world, which I have, and seen firsthand the kind of, I don't know what to call it, the very neat slicing away of the truth, and the constant presentation of something that isn't true or accurate. I mean, there's so many things. If you haven't been paying attention to the technology, then you're going to think that this is just a bump in the road and it'll all go back to normal, and that isn't what's in our future. We really need to open up. We need to open up the consciousness to what's really happening here. Let's just take all the bad elements out and let's just say, okay, let's just have a paradigm shift. What is a paradigm shift? It's a change in your belief systems, in your governance, in your the way you take care of yourself, the way you work, the way you raise your children, the way you build your house, the way you raise your family. It's a change in everything. And I had a period of time, 2 years, in 2013 and 2014, where I had all of the legs pulled out from under my world at one time. In I think it was about 9 months. Within about 9 months, I lost everything. My mother, my favorite sister, my religion, my literary hero, my my God, my scientific partners in the lab, everything. And that's only half of what we're facing in a paradigm shift. And so I experienced the kind of loss of meaning that occurs in that kind of shift. And it just leaves you like, okay, what? Kind of like a zombie. And that's not a, it doesn't feel good. There's a lot of tears. There's a lot of why did this have to change? So if you just look at the paradigm shift and you lose, say, two or three of the big supports for the way you see the world, that's a big crisis. And when you lose them all, I mean, that's a life and death type of crisis. And we are coming up on this need to make this shift. And it requires some wonderful kinds of changes, new dimensions of reality. What kind of world do you want? Those are the kinds of things that the robes said, this is what you need to be thinking about. What do you want? How do you want that world to work? How do you want it to be? And I actually went ahead with them to see how we had resolved so many of those issues, and they were absolutely heartwarming. I was blown away by what I saw, and I wrote the most easy to get your mind around kinds of changes. Yeah, I put that in robes because I felt like we needed to see what we were moving toward. And here we are, what is this, 44 years later? And I'm thinking, OMG, we are right on the cusp of that change. And we need to get creative. We need to open up to possibilities. We need to stop. They said you can't drive forward looking in the rearview mirror. And they said that several times. And a lot of people are looking in the rearview mirror. And what that rearview mirror says is, are we going to go back to normal? There's a whole new kind of normal coming. And I think it's wonderful enough that you would want to be part of it. I think what we have to do if we're going to make that journey is to think about, okay, what do we want? What's involved in a new paradigm? Well, what's involved is physical stuff, mental, emotional, spiritual, all of the things we have to deal with here, but it looks different. It has different meanings, different reasons for why you do this or don't do that. We really need to be thinking about some of those things. So,
An entire paradigm shift for a civilization is so unthinkable
I know.
for so many people. And I'll give you an example. I had a friend, I was speaking with a friend who kind of gets that things are not as they should be, realizes it's a little bit more than politics,
Yeah.
but so much wants to keep the life that she has now in place,
Mm.
the comforts, the ease, the not having to worry about food and shelter and this and that it's her decision that she's just not even going to look. She's not going to look. She's when she has extra time, she doesn't investigate, she doesn't think about it. She goes and plays games or something.
Oh,
What that brings us to is talking to people and saying, and I'll bring up a very hackneyed phrase that's been tossed around a lot in this community is
okay.
everything you've been told is a lie. Well,
That's true.
unfortunately, that's true.
Yeah, it is.
And yet it's so uncomfortable to hear. It's so uncomfortable to think about that because we have been so softened up
Hmm.
by the control system,
Right.
that we are not really personally responsible anymore. We're not really taking charge of our lives in a way that we
Not
could
at all.
be. We're not really thinking about, well, who is God? What is God? How am I related to this God thing? So when you're looking at, well, maybe my government isn't really looking out for my best interest. Maybe they really are trying to eliminate a whole bunch of us and in a not very nice way.
I know.
Maybe what I was taught in church doesn't really have a whole lot to do with God. Maybe the school that I sent my children to did not educate them, but indoctrinate them. What if the food I've been told was nutritious and healthful and good for my body is actually poisoning me. So all of a sudden, you have a human who's become very used to getting into a car with air conditioning and heating and driving on a freeway and going to the mall and doing all these things that are totally unrelated, in my opinion, to our connectionness to living on Mother Earth and growing as humans. If you take all of that away, now you're floating in the middle of space
Right.
alone with nothing.
Yeah, that's true. And you sparked a memory of something the Robes said that I don't think about very often, but they emphasize that if we were going to make this change successfully without dying in the process or giving up, that we needed to come together in small groups in our particular towns or regions or even families, and that if we were to do that, we would discover we did not need to be cold, overheated, hungry, uncomfortable, or thirsty. That the basis of life, the basic things, the things that everybody thinks they have to have in order to be comfortable, those would not go away 100%. And they emphasize, and I didn't really say much about this in the book. A little bit I did, but I used an example of a group of people from they were they had been part of the DuPont chemical system, that which is a big corporation, and they had survived. And they said, all of our knowledge is going to be lost. Let's put it to use. And they took all of that background and knowledge of chemistry and they started marrying that to the knowledge and understanding of it's all about frequency and plasma, a whole new kind of physics. And they started transforming waste and coming up with products that created no waste. And then there were other groups who did the similar things. There was a whole new kind of a housing material that was developed. It was like a ceramic or a glass. It was layered. Each layer did something different in terms of keeping us comfortable and things like that. If we come together and we work as teams, then the knowledge we have can be preserved and we can move forward, and the people who know how to do things from scratch, whether that's chemistry or electricity or plumbing or building or communications, whatever it is, if we come together and work together, all of that would be preserved. And yes, they said there would be some bumps. They said the internet was likely to go down. If it did, they said bring it back up. That is your survival mechanism. And at the time, there was no internet.
And
So
you didn't know, what are you talking about?
I know they kept calling it the global network. And I'm like, what global network? So here we are with this amazing thing called the internet. And they said, keep that communication going and share information and know-how and skills and hope with one another, and you'll make it, and you don't have to be cold and hungry and thirsty and miserable. And that we would then proceed forward from there with all new kinds of information and technology. They never said much about technology being suppressed, but shortly after I moved to the farm here, I came across an old book, Angels Don't Play This Harp, HAARP. And I forget, it was by Gene somebody, I think. And I read that and thought, oh my gosh, they are suppressing all kinds of technology.
And
Uh,
us being one of the technologies.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
So
That's the
let's,
consciousness.
so for someone who's, this is all new to them and they're going like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? Let's lay it out in a way that'll make it easier to understand. And what I say to my girlfriends, the ones who will listen, is
Yeah.
this takeover plan of Earth is not new. This is a plug and play system.
I like that. It is.
So let's go ahead and outline how a planet like Earth gets taken over and talk a little bit about that so that then we can identify, it's like, oh, yeah, that is happening. I just
Uh,
thought that was weird. No, that's a plan. And then in part two, we can start talking about how we get out of this in a way that serves us.
okay. I'm not sure how deep you want to go in the takeover
Well,
effort.
we've got about 20 minutes. And, to be honest with you, and I tell Penny this all the time when we talk, she's so sweet about it. Because this information for Penny, she's had it for 40 years.
Yeah,
She knows it backwards and forwards. She
right.
doesn't realize the rest of us don't know it because it's so comfortable for her and something that she's integrated. And I'm like, wait, wait, wait. Most of the people don't know that stuff. And so I kind of have to, say I am surrounded by people who have no idea what is
Oh,
really going on in the planet. They think it's politics.
oh, that's like skating on ice. You're on the surface and it's very thin ice.
Yeah.
So, I have some notes. Let me just kind of present like four kinds of topics in terms of like the takeover. Okay. And I'm not sure I'll do a good job with this, but I'll do my best. And I'm not going to go very deep. Like what's behind it all, we'll just leave that. But the goal has been let's talk about the like if you have a world and you want to take over that world, you have to contemplate taking over physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually.
Okay, but so why would you want to take over a world and who's taking it over? What's their motivation?
Oh, okay. So, do you want me to tell the truth? So, uh,
Hopefully.
there are other beings here. There are people that are other types of humans that want, I don't want to discourage anybody. They want to take over, and we're kind of like the animal farm. Okay. I hate to say that. They want to be responsible for breeding us, for altering our DNA, altering our thinking, our feeling, and the whole spirit of earth man. They want that. We are, I'll say this is on the good side of things. We are such a resilient group of humans, and we're known throughout the cosmos as those noisy, messy, unsinkable Molly Brown type humans on planet Earth. And that is respected, that the other people who have evolved have. When you evolve, you give up a few things, and one of those things is resilience, physical resilience. And so we are a source of DNA that is incredibly resilient, incredibly spunky, very, very able. They look at us and go, look at the mess they have made of that planet. Look at the pollution, the water, the soil, the air, the way they live, the garbage everywhere. And they're still just trucking along. How do they do that? Other races of beings can't have that. They can't have that degree of pollution or they will fold in a hot second. And so the takeover has been, let me say, let me stretch people's minds just a little bit here. The planet Earth is in a quadrant of the Milky Way galaxy that is on one of the outer arms of that galaxy. And it is a perfect spot for stopping off when you have interplanetary, intergalactic, and those are two different types of transportation abilities, but interplanetary is within the solar system, and intergalactic is between galaxies. And there are technologies that we are going to come to that will allow us to move intergalactically. But we're not there yet. But other people are. And there are people who would like to take over our planet and then make sure, number one, they can sell our DNA because this DNA is in demand because of our resilience. And there is also the what I'll call the charging. Like if you want to park on Earth for 24 hours, it'll cost you. And so there are some beings trying to take over. They are using humans for some very nasty purposes, and they are hoping to take over. There have been other solar systems in this area of the galaxy that have been taken over, and we are the next target. And there are other people out there saying, nope, draw the line with planet Earth. You're not going to disturb or get control of those people. So that's the pleasant side of what the takeover involves. There are hidden people here pulling all the strings. They are not very honorable. They are, I'm just going to say, they're not good people. So here we are, and we're fiddling with all of these little minor issues and failing to see the bigger picture. And when you have why, just ask yourself one question: why has the government continued to say until just recently, no, there's no ETs, there's nobody else here, we have no evidence? No, that's not true. Why? Because they didn't want anybody to know that there were other people here with very advanced technologies that were putting things in place for the last 500 to 5,000 years. That's usually the time it takes to take over a planet and get full control of the people on it. And so here we are, and they're right at the cusp of succeeding. And we are finally waking up saying, wait a minute, what's wrong with this picture? And that's really an important question to be asking.
Thank you, Penny. And I think that what you just described helps make sense for people because when I look at the world, I think, well, why is manufacturing so destructive to the planet? Well, because it's designed to be. Why
Yes,
is the food system so making people so fat and sick? Well, it's designed to be.
exactly.
Why is medicine, it seems so almost archaic and barbaric to me because people get in that system and they don't come out healthier.
No,
It's designed to be that way.
that's right.
And we as humans, and I I have a perspective on humans, I'm sure everybody does, but
Mhm.
my is that we are basically kind and loving and creative and thoughtful.
We are.
We are, but we're also, and I take full responsibility for this, we're gullible.
Oh, yes.
We're
I call it
gullible
being naive.
and we're naive. And the man on the TV says it and we go, oh, okay. Instead of saying, that doesn't make any sense.
No,
And that we have been conditioned slowly over time to give up our sovereignty, to turn off all of our spiritual connectedness, to let everyone else tell us how to run our lives, to feel bad about ourselves on a daily basis, 24/7.
I know.
This is all by design. And I
Yeah.
think that people, and it's maybe because, Penny runs in a circle of people who are very aware. So it's almost harder, when you don't, it's very clear to me that a lot of people are not connecting the dots here. And there's a lot of dots that need to be connected.
No. Yeah. I think there's this whole question that comes up that I get asked all the time. And it's like, well, you say this and you present that, but what are people supposed to do with that information? How are they supposed to think about that? And there's a dozen answers. I don't think we could even answer it all in the next hour, but we have to begin integrating that information. It is very difficult. I had a hard time, a very hard time admitting and realizing, oh, what I knew. It wasn't a case of belief anymore. It was what I knew, what I had experienced. And the question was, what does that mean? Why did that happen? What do I do with that? And
Yeah.
so I have forgotten what I did with it. Eventually, it just all became part of life. But what you have to do is begin to think more deeply, open your mind, talk with people. There's so much work that is going to need to be done very quickly now. And I've been saying this stuff for 40 years, and it kind of in a shy way because I didn't want to be laughed at 100%. People poo-pooed, etc. Now people are asking, more and more people are waking up. They're saying, that doesn't look right, and that doesn't feel right. And why is that happening? And you have to stop and begin putting together the big picture. What is that big picture? And it involves the whole spectrum of the human physical, mental, emotional, spiritual self. And so I have some questions that maybe we could leave with people or ask people to think about if you want to go there.
I want to ask one question first,
Okay.
and then we'll pose the question, and then we'll come back in part two and give
Okay.
some prompts for the questions. How about that?
Okay.
The question I have for you, and I have this all the time, Penny, I'm not as connected as you are in a lot of ways. You're spiritually connected in a way that is magical. Why are other civilizations, more advanced civilizations, so concerned about Earth? We are getting a ton of help. We're having channelers pop up everywhere. We're having off-planet wisdom come in. There is so much help coming to Earth, probably not seen by 99.99999% of the population, but I hear there's things going on in the sky.
That's true.
Why is this so important to other civilizations?
Because if they don't stand up, they stand a chance of running into the same kind of evil. If we have an earthquake and buildings fall down, look what happened in Turkey back in the spring. What did people do? They rushed to help. That is the nature of humanity, regardless of where you're from, unless you have evolved a system that is based on greed, selfishness, taking advantage of others, taking over others, using others, all of those things. There's good and bad in the universe. And those beings who are so interested in us, I'll say this is something that I don't talk about very often. We humans here on planet Earth have a really amazing destiny. Most people, and I kind of hinted at it a minute ago, most beings, civilizations, groups that evolve tremendously give up a huge amount of their physical self. They give up their physicality to an extraordinary degree. And when they do that, they become less resilient. So, why do they come here to get our DNA? When their civilization goes down enough that they're too weak and they're beginning to die out, they come here and they get some of our DNA to shore them up. So, we have this destiny that we're headed toward in which we do not give up our physicality, and yet we evolve the consciousness to become or to enter into what is often called the God state. I have been in that state. It's amazing. I'll just say that. It's not something that you can even imagine being in. It's beyond anything here. We can then step into that God state as a human and then operate with the full power of consciousness, which is extraordinary. And they have evolved. And when a line of humans is on track to develop something unique and beautiful and new, that becomes a special focus of attention for those who are already evolved, but they still need us. They don't need our messiness. They don't need our fears. They don't need our freaked out and freaking, how do you say that? Our freaked out way of doing things. They don't need our shoot first, ask questions later kind of approach to life. but they love our toughness. They love our resilience. They see our destiny. They see it far better than we do. And they're saying these guys are worth working to save. And we don't want to have to deal with that in this quadrant of the galaxy.
Okay.
So it's a big commitment. There are lots of people here, and they have told me point blank to my face, we can't do it for you. You have to do it for yourself. We
Yeah.
can support if we see you making an effort and we see your intention. Sometimes they will sneak in and add their energy, which is incredibly powerful to make that thing that we're trying to make happen happen. And so they have said that. And they have said, we'll share information, we'll share feedback, we'll give you feedback. Are you going in the right direction or no? You might think about this. And so for those of us who have been trying to put messages out that people can get their mind around, it's been difficult because you're countering the whole that conspiracy theory label, which to me is just a joke because there's only two theories of history. One is, it's all accidental, and the other is it's all planned and it's all orchestrated. And so somebody slapped a conspiracy on the planned orchestrated side of things, and
Just to make
they
sure that we didn't go down that road.
yeah, exactly. And so when people say, oh, that's just conspiracy theory, I'm like, yeah, that's conspiracy, all right. Who is conspiring together?
Mhm. Yeah.
Why?
So Penny, we've established that what's going on in the planet isn't politics. And it's not just bad planning. There is actually a bigger picture about humanity and the future of Earth.
Right.
Let's talk about what questions you think that we need to start thinking about for ourselves and how we're going to develop the skill set to get where we need to be to have the earth that we want to live on. And then we'll come back in part two and address those questions.
Okay, so I have a few, I think these are critical questions. And they are, there's four sets of questions. There's three or four questions in each set. But before we even do that, let's go back to the main thing. This is something the Little Man in Brown Robes emphasized again and again is you have to establish personal responsibility. Nobody's here to take care of you. You're here to take care of yourself. And if you do a good enough job with that, maybe you can help one or two others. So personal responsibility, these questions are based on that concept, okay? So regarding the physical self, they wanted us to ask, are you in the right location? Are you in the right location? And I was like, you're not telling me that people might have to move, are you? And they said, what do you think that means? That doesn't mean are you sitting in the right chair in your living room? So I think we have to ask ourselves that. The second thing was, do you know how to survive in that location if your supports are pulled away? In the north, you have to have supplemental heat. In the south, you have to have some way of remaining cool. It doesn't matter where you are in the world that we have, you have to be able to have access to some electricity and some communication. So people need to prepare for that. If so, that do you know how to survive in that location? The next thing they asked was, what skills do you need to survive? What is the skill set? If you need to produce heat, do you know can you cut down a tree? Do you know which trees to cut down? Do you have the saws available? Do you have the manpower? Do you have the stamina to cut down a tree? And cut it up and put it in a wood stove. And then and they also emphasized a lot, like, do you know, are you connected to Mother Nature in that region? What do you know about Mother Nature? If all of the supports came down and there was a big storm and your roof needed repair or your door blew out, and you're in the South, are snakes and alligators and spiders and whatever else wants to come in, is that going to come trotting into your living room? And what are you going to do about that? And so that whole idea of knowing the nature in your location, that's very, very important. What kinds of snakes to avoid, what kinds of critters to avoid. And look here, we have a mosquito floating around my computer in the middle of winter. They are very resilient. Animals are intent on surviving as well. Do you have the consciousness to interact with Mother Nature in such a way that they remain safe and you remain safe? So that's the physical, that's just the starter questions for the physical, the kinds of questions you have to ask yourself about the physical side of things. And then there's the mental. What ethics have you committed to? Ethics are cooperation, generosity, kindness, honesty, truth. I have a whole list of 20, 32 ethics that I keep here on my whiteboard that I think are critical. And they are reminders of how I want the world to be. So you have to examine your ethics. That's the first mental thing. The next thing is, who do you trust? Can you trust your neighbor? Can you trust your family? Do you trust the people in your town? Who's running your town? All that kind of stuff. What are your mental strengths and your mental weaknesses? So mental strengths are the ability, if something goes wrong, do you freak out and collapse in a little pile? Or do you say, uh-oh, what can I do about that? How can I fix that? The other day when we were having a blizzard and it was 22 below zero Fahrenheit and the wind was blowing 50 miles an hour and it's dark and it's at night and the electricity goes out. What do you do then? We had a whole crop of microgreens that was to be delivered today. And the first question was not, I'm cold. Call the electric company, was how do we protect the microgreens? And we have generators. So, and three of them are solar generators. And you can't get solar at night, but they're all charged. And so, and we have extra heaters that we move around. So we took them all down to the microgreens room. That kind of thing. What is your strength when a crisis occurs and what's your weakness? So, and you have to know yourself. You have to know who you are and how you are. Are you forward thinking? That's the next mental skill. Or are you always looking backwards? Well, we used to. Well, well, I don't like that. I want this other thing that is from the past. That's a problem. You have to be forward thinking. And then the last is, what mental skills do you have? In other words, can you focus? Can you concentrate? When you are listening to somebody else, are you do you have the mental capacity to use your emotional and spiritual gifts to listen to what that person is saying or watch what they're doing and get the deeper meaning of that? Read that action, read it symbolically. Do you have those kinds of skills? So that's the mental. And then the emotional is, and most people are pretty emotional. Have you deeply, deeply examined your feelings? What's your true feelings about this, about that, about him, about her, about yourself, about the places in your life where you did stuff that you wish you hadn't done or you wish you had done? You have to deeply examine your feelings. Otherwise, you're going to be run by guilt. And that is a disaster. That's a recipe for failure. Next is, do you have emotional discipline? When somebody attacks you, can you stand back and listen? What are they saying? Is that justified? Do I have something to learn? Are they just showing me who they are? What's really happening here? That's emotional discipline. So I think the next thing is, have you ever experienced unconditional love? Those of us who have children and great grandchildren, or a beloved pet, or a beloved cow on my part, you experience unconditional love. And it's, you don't have to, they don't have to do anything. You're just going to keep loving, period. There's no conditions attached to your love. So, do you understand the people around you as emotional beings having their own emotions, or are they just a pain in the butt? Are they your enemy? Are they a nuisance in your life? You know, what are you doing with other people and their emotions? How do you see them? And then the last category is spiritual, and these are really critical. Have you moved behind or beyond dogma? Are you really into understanding the true spirit of yourself? Spirituality is not how much you pray or do rosaries or how many times you go to church or how many statues you have on your cupboard or your shelf or how many pictures on the wall. It's what is the true spirit of yourself. And have you honored that? Have you developed that? That's true spirituality. All that other stuff is for show. It's useless. So, are you free to direct your life in accordance with your heart? Are you following your heart? That's where the true spirit of yourself resides. Are you doing what you love to do? If you're doing what you hate, look what you're contributing to the world. It's not good. So, are you free to direct your life in accordance with your heart? The next thing is, have you moved beyond competition to cooperation? That's a fourth dimensional position, is cooperation. Okay, I'm going to cooperate. I'm not going to complain. I'm not going to say it shouldn't be this way. I'm going to look at what is, and I'm going to figure out where I stand with that. And I'm going to cooperate with what is good and beautiful and true and ethical and grace-filled and et cetera, et cetera. And then the next is, can you identify the spirit of a governance system, the spirit of a medical system, the spirit of an educational system, the spirit of your town hall people, the spirit of the food system? Can you look at those big institutions and ask yourself, what is the true spirit of that institution? What are they really doing? What is their intention, their deep intention? And if you can't identify that, you're probably going to end up in trouble. You're going to end up fooling yourself. And the last thing is, do you nurture life in all of its forms? Do you nurture life in all of its forms? Where does that start? That starts with you. Are you feeding yourself crap? That's not nurturing life. Are you failing to get out there and exercise and use the body because body's a use it or lose it thing? Are you able to contribute something good to other people's lives in any way at all? When you do that, you feel good about yourself and you nurture the life within. Do you read? Do you pick up the spirit of the words in that book written by that author who's trying to share what's in his or her mind with you? And do you listen to, videos and things like this and say, okay, what's the message there? That's the spirit. So those are the four basic categories that are starting points, and then it goes on from there.
Penny, that was very thought-provoking, wonderfully. But thank you so much. We're going to come back with part 2 and do a deeper dive into those very questions and maybe put together a plan that's going to help us save the earth.
Okay. Yeah, help us get our minds around what's happening and work together.
That sounds wonderful.
Cowering in the corner in fear, saying, bah.
No, we're going to do this. Thank you, Penny. We'll be back for part 2 next.
You're welcome.
I hope you enjoyed this video. Coming up next, this is a good one, or you might really like this one too. Either one of them could be perfect for you. Before you leave, don't forget to subscribe.